This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 21 of Equestrian Legends, presented by Pessoa. Hello and welcome to the programme. My guest this week is New Zealander Jennifer Millar. But first, a message from our sponsors. The name Pessoa is legendary in equestrian circles. During his phenomenally successful career as a rider, Nelson Pessoa set his sights on creating the ultimate in saddle design. Not satisfied with the perfection of balance, aesthetics and craftsmanship, Nelson's goal was to provide riders of every level the opportunity to train and compete in a true competition-level saddle. A saddle that would be an aid to their balance and riding style, while offering a comfortable fit for most any horse. Most importantly, Nelson felt that the saddle was a tool that riders should not miss out on because of price. With these goals, the modern-day Pessoa was born and has come to encompass saddles, strap goods, horse boots and blankets. You can find out more about all of these products by visiting the website at pessoausa.com. Jennifer Millar was born on November 25th, 1935 in Christchurch, New Zealand, the older of 6 children to Ian and Eunice Cloudsley. She began her career with horses in the Pony Club, then competed in dressage, show jumping and hunter jumpers, and also fox hunted for many years. Her adult life has been devoted to officiating in equestrian sport, including as an instructor and team trainer for New Zealand's young riders eventing teams and chef de keep of the senior team. She has been course designer and technical delegate for numerous events around the world and stewarded at Olympic Games in all disciplines. For 10 years, she was the organiser and course designer for Taupo 3-day event. Jennifer was director of Olympic Solidarity Development Assistance courses for technical delegates and course designers. Between 2004 to 2011, she served as President, Vice President and Chairman on the Equestrian Sport New Zealand National Board. Jennifer was a member of the FEI Eventing Committee from 1994 to 1998 and also served as its Deputy Chairman. In 1998, Jennifer was awarded Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit by the Queen for services to equestrian sport both in New Zealand and internationally. In 2001, she was recognised by the International Olympic Committee with a diploma for her contribution as a volunteer to the development of sport and Olympicism and to the promotion of friendship and solidarity among peoples. Jennifer and her husband Bruce, who have 2 children, Deborah and Wendy, live in Te Puke, Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, where she continues to support equestrianism at all levels. Well, Jennifer, horses have been very kind to you and given you a most wonderful career, haven't they?
They certainly have. The love of the horse has taken me all around the world.
It has, hasn't it? And officiating at, the best events in the world. I mean, not only have you got to travel, but to watch the sport evolve over the years must have been very satisfying.
Yes, it was. And I think I go back to my roots where I was really just a pony clubber that didn't have, had the odd horse or two. And then I began working in some of these developing countries, and I could relate to these people that didn't have the great opportunities that some of the riders have now. I've had fantastic time working in the developing countries, but maybe you want to talk about that later.
Right. Well, let's go back to the beginning then, Jennifer, because you're a New Zealander through and through, a true Kiwi, born in Christchurch in 1935. What was childhood like for you?
Childhood, I came from a big family. There were 6 of us in the family. My grandfather was very much in our family. He was a coach driver in the old days, and Cobb and Co. And I think that's where my love of horses came from. I used to sit on his knee, and he'd tell me all about the horses and how they galloped, and the brakes gave out, and he had to whip the horses along, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful stories he used to tell us. But I lived in a city, and it was very difficult to have horses in a city. But as when I was about 12 or 13, I was given an old trotter, if you can believe it. And I thought I was made. And from there, I went on and I rode a lot of horses and had horses in sections in town, and then went from there. So, Pony Club had a big influence in my life, as it does in many horse people's lives in New Zealand, because New Zealand Pony Club is very, very strong. And so I really started with Pony Club.
And you said you come from a large family, of course, one of 6. Lots of brothers there. Anyone else in the family interested in horses, or was it just you?
It was just me, and I had 5 younger brothers. No, I was the only one. I used to bring my odd brothers, some of my brothers, if they chose, and they'd come with me and they'd groom for me at a show or whatever. But that's about as much interest they had in the horses.
So what was your parents' reaction to you wanting to go off with horses as a small girl?
My parents supported me, absolutely supported me. They thought I was quite mad because I used to go and work and do a bit of ironing for neighbours and what have you, and get enough money to pay for a bit of feed for the horses. I mean, this is probably hard to believe, but it was tough in those days. You know, we were young and there wasn't a lot of money about in those days, and we weren't on a farm, and if you wanted to do something and you were interested in a sport, you really had to work for it. And I think that's what made it so, that's when I look back and think, well, I didn't have the opportunities, but I've made the opportunities, and I've worked very hard to make them.
Well, of course, Christchurch being in the South Island is not quite as horsey as it is in the North Island, is it?
Well, there's not as many horses, but Christchurch they have their own equestrian centre. In those days they didn't, but we had a very strong pony club. And showing and pony club and show jumping and hunter jumping, as you call it, hunter jumping, we call it round the ring, was very much what we did in those days. Remember, FEI, as we used to call it, jumping, was just starting then, and also eventing. We just did it at Pony Club, but it was nothing like we've got now. And with the show jumping, we had a Hungarian trainer came out and showed us what these coloured rails were all about. And we went to courses with, it was Coleman Bolger from Hungary, and we learned all about show jumping there. So we had an overall picture of many disciplines, but nothing, we never concentrated on any particular discipline.
And of course it would be a while before New Zealand produced any really, memorable names and superstars in any of the FEI disciplines. So who would have been your role models then in the sport, Jennifer, when you were very young?
My role model, I really think I looked up to the president of the equestrian sport. I thought, what a wonderful man Mr. Rutherford he was. Excuse me a minute. He started the Horse Society, as we call it now, and that's the basis of where we are today, you know. And I looked up to him and really thought, I really can't talk to this man. He's just so high up in this business, you know. Mm-hmm. But he helped the sport in New Zealand initially.
Now, what about competitors, though, with show jumping and eventing? Of course, eventing was really yet to take off in any serious way in your part of the world. But show jumpers, of course, you'd be reading magazines and watching what you could. Were there any riders that you aspired to? Did you have a competitive streak yourself?
I did, but I did have a competitive streak, but only at national level because I never had the opportunity to have very good horses. And I rode for a dealer a lot of the time, and when the horses were ready, they were sold. So I never had any aspirations that I would ever be a great rider. I was just a run-of-the-mill rider, but I loved the sport. But we looked at when they first sent a team to Japan, the jumpers. I thought this was absolutely fantastic. But we're going back in the 50s then, and it was just starting, the fact that you could actually travel horses. So that was jumping, and show jumping was very strong in those days as we came through, and eventing didn't come through till later.
Right. And, of course, New Zealand is often considered, such a rural environment for people growing up where they can ride their ponies to school and that sort of thing. We often hear those kind of stories. Did you ride your pony to school?
No, I didn't, but I have to say that when I got married, and we're going on and we're jumping 20 years, when I got married, I came onto a farm, and we've been farming for 50-odd years. And, of course, my family, my children had all those opportunities. They didn't ride to school, but they had every opportunity with their horses. And we all hunted. My husband's a horse person too. He'll tell you that he went to shows before I did because he was on a farm.
Right.
And he had those opportunities.
Right.
So we all... Go on.
Well, that was a shared interest then, the horses.
That's how I met my husband, through the shows, and we had a shared interest, which is he has been a terrific support for my whole of my married life, really. And he's been interested too because he's helped build cross-country fences. I mean, he's been fully involved, so I've been very fortunate, really. Now, going back to those early days, Jennifer, when you were growing up, it was, obviously wartime. It was World War II going on at that time. Was there any fallout effect on your family? Was anyone involved either remotely with that effort? No, not really. My father wasn't allowed to go to the war because he had flat feet, so he was home helping to support the family. So I had no connection with. We just knew that we had ration cards and we had to be careful with what we spent because of the rationing. And that's what I remember, going to the grocers with rationing cards. And do you remember some of the produce that you got with those ration cards? Was there the concentrated orange juice and things like that? Yeah, and butter. And butter. You were cut off a bit of butter. I'm aging myself when I talk about that, but as a child I can remember very well going across to the grocers and getting half a pound of butter with a coupon. Yes, and of course meat was in rations too, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Yes, no, it was a very different childhood from what our family, our children had, and also what is now, What would be your fond memories then of growing up during that period, whilst you were still at school? My best memory was being given a bicycle, and I had a big kerosene tin, and I used to put all the feed for the horse in the tin and put it on the handlebars, and I had a bike, and I didn't have to walk to the paddock to feed the horse. And my first bike was when I think about it, I haven't thought about it for a long time, but getting a bike made so much easier for me with my horse riding. It really did. And now what about school, Jennifer? You went to Christchurch Girls High School, but was that something that you enjoyed doing? Were you a good scholar? Yes, I was a good scholar, and I stayed at school until university entrance, and then I decided to get a job so I could carry on with the horses, to be honest. I never went to university. I wanted to ride my horses, and so I had a really good education. I got my school certificate and did what I had to do, and it's held me in good stead for the administration side of what I did. Because then I went on to work, and I worked in insurance and then in IRD, which is the Inland Revenue. And so I had good jobs that supported my love of the horse. Of course, that would have been all too important. I'm sure your parents were encouraging you to be self-funded at that time if you were going to enjoy your horses as well. Very much so. Yeah, very much so. That was very much of that generation, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Yeah. So what sort of values would they have taught you that you have passed on to your children, Jennifer? Well, we were told when we were young, be honest. Always be honest. Never be be cruel to people because it'll come back to, and you won't like it. And I've always had this. I can go to bed at night knowing that I've done the best I can for anything I've been involved in with the sport, and in my lifetime. I think that's the biggest thing was honesty, and it has held me in good stead right through.
Now, you mentioned horses obviously were your priority then, that you wanted to give up everything so you could focus on your horses. What did that look like for you at that age, Jennifer? What type of horses were you riding?
Right, I had, in those days, we just didn't have horses that just did jumping. We rode, we got on our horse and we went to the shows. Now, the shows are like your shows where you have round the ring, and I call it Ponzi stuff now, but we did it, and your best hack or best rider or whatever, and then we also jumped at the same horse at the show, but to get to the show we would have ridden 30 k's to the show, and we'd do a circuit of shows, and we'd compete at the shows, and I had some nice thoroughbred horses and I had some nice ponies, and only usually one at a time. And we compete, and then we leave our horses with friends, and then the next Friday we go on to the next show. And so we did a whole circuit. But our horses were so fit because we rode them everywhere. At that stage, earlier on, about when we were about 17 or 18, we didn't think of taking horse trucks or horse floats to shows. It was only later we did that.
Now, where did the crossroads come when you turned left or right or decided which direction you were going to go into, and eventing was a focus for you? How did that come about? Well,
it came about really after I was married. First of all, we all we all hunted. So up here, I'm in the North Island now, and I'm near Rotorua, which is one of the, I guess, people that come to New Zealand have to go to Rotorua to see all the sulphur and smelly stuff. But I live near Rotorua and I live near the coast. And when we came to live here, the children had ponies, and they were about 5 or 6. And my eldest daughter, she was very, very keen on horses. And we all went to Pony Club. We all hunted. And then at Pony Club, I got really interested in the eventing side of it because, first of all, they said, well, can you build some cross-country jumps? So I thought about this, and yes, I think I can. So my husband and I, in the very early 80s, we went off to England and went to Wiley, and that had a big influence on my thoughts about course designing. And we did a lot of travelling, and I specifically was looking at cross-country, because I thought, I love this, I can do this. So anyway, I started at Pony Club level building cross-country and designing and building cross-country. Bruce, my husband, would help me. And that's how we really started with eventing. And so as an instructor at Pony Club, I had to teach the children about cross-country as well as jumping. And so I used to go to courses that were held by trainers, and we'd learn about how to ride cross-country, how to ride jumping, etc. And so it was really through Pony Club, when the children were young, and I'm talking about 40 years ago, that my interest in eventing really started.
Which pony clubs were you most involved with, and also the one that you started with near Christchurch when you were younger?
When I was in Christchurch, I belonged to the Rickers and Fenelton Pony Club, which is still going actually, and then up here in the North Island, I was involved with a little place called Matata, and it's just in the Western Bay of Plenty, and we had Te Puke and we had Matata Pony Clubs, and they were all in a little group here. So I was very involved with this area of Pony Club in the Bay of Plenty.
And that, of course, involves some administration as well. You got into administrative side of the sport as well, Jennifer. Maybe your training and your early jobs might have helped you, as you said, with the administration. What was the appeal to you to go that way in the sport? Because you had so many choices with the sport evolving in New Zealand at that time.
Yes, well, I think what happened, it's like everything else. There's not a lot of volunteers that are prepared to put their hand up. And I know I first started as a scorer and then as a secretary and at Pony Club level. And then you go out and you design the cross country as well. And so there was a group that at Pony Club level, and we just did everything. And that's how it started. You became a jump judge or whatever. You just did everything because we were just small groups, that put our hand up and said, yes, we'll be a jump judge, or yes, I'll be the treasurer, or something like that. But so that's how I started with administration, really started with the Pony Club.
Well, of course, when you start to, get involved with that side of the sport, you need courses to go on. As you said, you went to England and got some experience at Wiley. But did that mean that you got involved with developing courses for educating and training people in course designing and technical delegate work and, the FEI responsibilities of officiating that you were so involved with?
Well, initially it was nationally. I used to take courses around New Zealand under the auspices of Equestrian Sport New Zealand, because by then we were with more or less coming out of Pony Club into Horse Society or the Federation. And so I was the rules officer and the planning officer for New Zealand eventing. And so my job initially was to go around New Zealand and take courses on rules or course designing or technical delegate work or whatever. And so that's where I first started. It was nationally I started before I became involved with the FEI doing all these courses.
Was that a natural progression then for you, Jennifer, or was there peer pressure on you to become an international judge and designer?
No, there was no peer pressure whatsoever. I was involved at our Equestrian Centre at Taupo, and we only ran national classes. And I said to the group, I think we can run an international class here, but what are they? More or less, they said. What's it involve? And so I was involved in running the first ever CCI in New Zealand, and that was at our Taupo Equestrian Centre. And so I had to become a course designer, international course designer, which I did, and I was then able to be the course designer for that particular site. And so I was the first course designer for a long time, and then we gradually brought more people in, and also the technical delegate, same thing. They had to go to courses. I think we went to a course in the States somewhere initially, so we can get our ticket to be a course designer and a TD.
Well, you were a pioneer, really, at that time with the sport just beginning to see the light in New Zealand. And you, as you mentioned, you were at Taupo 10 years there as the organiser and course designer. Course designing then was a little bit different. What did you see as your challenges then when you were beginning to become recognised as a course designer nationally and then internationally? Well,
initially when it progressed at Taupo particularly, where we ran our CCIs. It progressed over the years, and when we look back, I look back and I think, my gosh, some of those jumps were pretty big. We asked a lot of questions, and I look back, and we didn't seem to have the accidents. I don't recall ever having a serious accident, but we asked big questions, and we had lighter timber, and our riders came a lot from farms, and they rode over the hills, or they came through the sport riding on a sheepskin around the hills, and they had stickability, and you put anything in front of them and they'd say, yes, we can do that. Because I know at Taupo initially before the Olympics in LA, we had Mark Todd. We had to get them qualified, and we had courses there, and our FEI chair at the time, Viscount Gravier, came to New Zealand to okay the course so that it was up to standard, because we had really no standards in this country. And he came and he approved the standard, and then those horses were able to qualify for, initially LA.
Well, you obviously got very busy very quickly, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Once you started doing that and you were designing tracks around New Zealand, but also you ventured overseas pretty soon, doing the ones in South America, of course, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, to name a few, as the course designer. And you would have seen those course designs evolving, Jennifer. What do you think were the biggest changes and influences in your pattern of designing over those years?
I think safety. I really think safety was the big issue, because a lot of countries, well, for example, in India, which is quite interesting, I've had 3 trips to India, and that was really my first time going over with Olympic Solidarity to help the Indians to try and get a standard there, because they only had national trials, and it was an interesting country because it was all army, and I worked with the army, and if an officer told a rider to jump something, they had to jump it regardless of whether it was safe or not. And so when I went there, I was amazed at some of the jumps that they built. I thought these are impossible to jump, and what we had to do was go through the rule book and say you cannot have these kind of fences, huge oxes with big drops, and they were expected to jump them without falling off, and things that were just not what I consider safe. So I really enjoyed my job with developing those sports in these countries, and India was a real challenge, because they built the cross country. We'd get it up to what I thought was safe and at 1-star level, and then at night they'd take all the jumps away and store them, because all the locals would have gone and pulled all the jumps and used them for firewood. So we had certainly had some big challenges with Olympic Solidarity.
Well, you were obviously, as I said, very involved internationally then, not just as a designer, but as a technical delegate. You attended competitions literally all over the world, didn't you? The highest
yes, I did.
level. You were the first woman to be appointed as TD for an Olympic Games in Sydney. That must have been fun in your backyard.
Yes, it was. It was an amazing to be appointed there. I was very humbled to think that they could do that. I think they sent me to Burleigh, and I think the FEI committee sent me to Burleigh as a TD there at the 4-star at Burleigh. And I think they, unbeknown to me, they were testing me to see if I could cope with Sydney. And I came through okay, obviously, because then I was asked to do Sydney. And I think that would be the highest honour of my career, to be honest, because, as you said, I was the first woman, and I think I am still the first woman to be appointed as a technical delegate for Olympics, and also the first Australasian, because everything was in Europe or in the States then. It was not down here, not in the bottom of the world. And you know about Sydney, because I know you were involved there with your broadcasting, what have you. But Sydney was an amazing Olympics. I started there 3 years leading up to the Games, and when I first did my first visit, I got there, I think it was just after the Games before, about 4 years before, and had a look at the proposed site, and I couldn't believe it could be an Olympic site. It was just a huge, big rubbish dump. And I think I was so lucky to be working with the course designer, Mike Etherington Smith, and we worked with Green Australia, and they wanted they planted 35,000 trees on the site, and we had all these people working with us to make sure that these games were going to be good games. And so I enjoyed the challenge. I was very fortunate that, we were an English-speaking country. I think that helped. And I was able to have 8 people, international technical officials, to come at the event and help, because in those days there was only one technical delegate. I never had any assistant technical delegates, and we had 2 tracks. We had one for the teams and one for the individuals, and it was a huge job. And I think after Sydney, I said to the FEI, you will have to have assistants, like assistant TDs, because this is a huge job when you have 2 tracks. Of course, the sport's changed now, but in those days there was roads and tracks, a steeplechase, and two tracks, one team and one individual for the cross country. So it was a big job.
And also, Jennifer, when you were obviously right in the thick of the sport, it was also evolving as not only a national but an international sport in New Zealand. And you were getting recognition by riders, obviously, such as Mark Todd and then Vaughan Jeffrey, Blythe Tate and Andrew Nicholson, Andrew Benny, and on it goes. It was a very interesting time for you to watch the athletes themselves get international recognition, as well as what you were doing for the sport back nationally at home.
Yes, it was, and it was so exciting because in '84, when we went to LA for the Olympics, there was only no more than half a dozen New Zealanders there. And that just shows you, at that time, people didn't realise that we can do it. And we had that team in LA, and my husband and I went, and the whole thing was different then. I mean, you weren't allowed to walk the cross-country in Los Angeles until the 6 o'clock in the morning of the cross-country. And I mean, I went there because I wanted to see what the Americans were building for cross-country, so it gave us an idea of what was happening in the world. And so, it's not that long ago that there wasn't that many people that knew about eventing, and that our riders were going to become people that were going to be recognised as some of the best in the world.
And they certainly were right there in LA, launched onto the world stage and never looked back in the development of the sport for New Zealand.
That's true. And then, of course, that rubs off on what happens in your own country, because every child wanted to be a Mark Todd. And, of course, eventing boomed from there on. And we had a lot more events here, a lot more horse trials, and we had more international classes. And when I say international, you see, we ran under international rules. They were FEIs, CCIs, or whatever, but we don't have the huge population here. And so you'd be building tracks for maybe 10 or 20 riders at three-star level. But we've continued doing that, and I think that's what has happened now as we do that. And then when they do the three-star here, the next thing they're off to England, or they're off to the States, or they're off to Australia, because they want to go where there's more competition. But it's been a very good grounding for riders when they've gone overseas, they've seen the tracks here, and they don't get fazed by seeing tracks elsewhere because they know they've jumped tracks similar at home here.
So that really meant that you had to up your game and keep abreast of the international development of the sport to bring those challenges back home.
Yes, I did. And we travelled continuously. We were dairy farmers, and in the winter, from about May or June, July, I think we went to Europe every year for about 10 years. And we used to have a little camper van, and the English people and all our friends would laugh at us, but we just went from event to event all around Europe and England, and we did that for, it must be the best part of 10 years, and we kept up with, I was lucky because my husband was so interested too, and we kept up with what was going on in the sport. So we had a very good idea of, if we come back to New Zealand, this is the kind of thing you'll see in Europe and the States and in England.
Well, you've mentioned Bruce, of course. He's been by your side and is so well known as part of the partnership. Literally, wherever you were, wherever Jennifer was, Bruce would be right there supporting you. So let's rewind all the way back, Jennifer, to when you actually met your husband. You said it was through horses. How did it come about?
I was at a show competing, and I've always been friends with a group that lived where he was, and he happened to be at the show, and he said, "Would you like to come to the dance tonight?" We always had a show after the dance, and that's how it all started. And so it wasn't long before we were actually engaged. It was, I think, 6 months, because I knew him through a group of friends. And so, it was great. Yeah, it just happened.
Well, that sounded seamless, Jennifer, but tell us about the proposal.
Oh, my goodness. Bruce would say I proposed to him, but that's not quite right. No, he said, no, I think, I can't remember the proposal. I know that I can remember going with him to buy the engagement ring. It was, it was so exciting. In those days, everyone got married, and it was so exciting to get engaged, and then you'd be engaged for so many months, and then you get married, and it was just the biggest thing. a little bit different in these days.
What year was that, Jennifer?
In 1959.
Right.
1960 we got married. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Were you married in Christchurch?
Yes, we were. Yes, and we immediately, when I think about it, leaving my family like that, I'd always lived at home, and we were married in 1960, and we got in our little car and we came to the North Island, and we were managing a sheep and cattle station for about a year. And because we knew that if we came to the North Island, we could make enough money to buy a farm. And eventually that's what we did. We went dairy farming and share milking, as they call it, for about 7 years and bought our own farm.
Well, in between time, was there an opportunity to have a honeymoon anywhere?
Oh, yes, we went to Mount Maunganui for a few days and then we went to work.
That was the nature of things those days, wasn't it? Just
yes, it was.
Get back to earning a living.
Yeah.
And earning a living off the land, which is so common down there, of course. So you settled in the North Island into married life and had 2 children, 2 girls. Now, did you encourage them to ride?
I didn't need to. We had horses here, and the eldest girl was so keen. And I remember we were milking one morning, and she was 4. She hadn't gone to school, and we got this little pony on the farm. And she'd gone and put the bridle on, and she'd come to the gate of the cowshed, and I nearly had a fit because here she was bareback on this pony, and she could hardly ride. And so it just was ingrained into them. I mean, they just loved the horses. And and from then on, we did encourage them. And once we bought our own farm, and we were able to, we had our trucks and what have you, and the 4 of us would all go off hunting or whatever, a pony club or whatever we do. And so it was just part of life, and it was for almost 20, 30 years. We bred horses, and we all rode, and it was just part of our life. It was wonderful.
Do you still ride?
No, I don't ride now, and I haven't ridden for about 10 years. I had a little bit of an accident, and I hurt my back. So that's really what turned me into going into more administration side of it.
Well, you certainly devoted a lot to the administration of the sport. You mentioned earlier that you were director of the Olympic Solidarity Development for technical delegates and course designers, and that involved a lot of travelling too. And you were also the FEI Development Officer for eventing in Asia. So a lot of really committing yourself to developing the sport in a good and positive way in some of those far-reaching countries, Jennifer. That must have been a huge challenge, really, when you saw what had happened what could happen in New Zealand, that you could potentially influence, the rising of the tide mark, if you will, in other countries.
I think it has been a challenge, but oh so rewarding. I mean, I think about when I first went to South Africa, and that was later because I'd been to India and Thailand and Malaysia and Hong Kong, Chile and Uruguay, Argentina and all those other countries. And the last time that I worked with, when I went in initially to a country was South Africa. At that stage, they hadn't had any international events. But I went in as I did a seminar there, and also as a TD, and helping with them. And I worked there several years. I had several trips there, and they were like sponges, the South Africans, because they were horse people, and all they wanted to do was learn. And I think my greatest joy was to see them at WEG, in the States. They rushed up to me and said, "You said we could do it, and we've done it." And I think that was absolutely fantastic. For me, that was a rich reward for all the work that went in.
Absolutely. It certainly was. Well, of all the countries that you've officiated in, you've watched the sport grow over the years, do you have any favourite venues, Jennifer?
Oh, well, I know you live in the States, but I've always said Kentucky was my favourite event where I TD'd. I just loved the way the people worked, the friendliness, and Janie Atkinson, who was the director then. I just thought it was just the most... I dreamed about Kentucky. I remember when they had the first World Games there in the 70s, we were busy farming with our head down, and we didn't even think of going. And a friend went, and I felt so jealous, and I said, I just would love to go to Kentucky Park. But anyway, I got there, and it was everything I thought it was, and I think it still is my favourite place.
Wow, and you officiated there, 4 times?
Yes, I did, and I also ran a seminar there for international course designers and CDs.
So when you look back on your career now, as you settled down a little bit, not doing so much travelling internationally, if you review what you've done and what you've achieved, what are you most proud of, Jennifer? I mean, I know you referred to, obviously influencing the sport in the developing nations, but if you have to tell your grandchildren a story, what would it be?
I think if you want to do something, you can do it. I say to my grandchildren now, there's no such word as can't. There is no such word. And there's no such word as being bored. And I say to my grandchildren, when I was young, I wanted to do this, and it wasn't easy, and I did it. And you have to accept that there's good and bad. I mean, when I think of some of the places I've been to and worked in the Olympic solidarity with developing countries, some people wouldn't do it. And I know at the time, when I was working in India, and I'm sure you'd just love to hear this little story, but I was working in an army base, and it was at Merit, where the Indians and the English used to, they had the big fights there. But they put me up in the officers' quarters, and I was a woman, so they put an armed guard at the door, and in this quarters was wonderful long red velvet curtains. They were 20 foot high, and it must have been fantastic in the days of the Raj, but they gave me a sheet and one blanket, and it wasn't too clean. I had mice running over me, and the first night, the shower and the loo weren't working properly, so in the morning they bought me a great big bucket of water, and I used a dipper to wash my hair on a concrete floor, and there was cockroaches everywhere, and when I went to the loo at night, I had to put my gumboots on. So I can remember in the morning saying, this is where the FEI has sent me to work. You've got to be a certain kind of person, because some people can't handle that kind of thing. But, India, they just don't have loos. And I remember at the event saying, when you're technical delegate, you go in the gate and you say, now the first thing that people want to get out is get out of the truck and go to the loo or the bathroom or whatever you call it. And I said to the people that were running it, I said, well, where are the toilets? Oh, they looked at me, and I said, well, you've got to have one. So anyway, they put a tent up, and they dug a hole in the ground, and they put my name on the outside of the tent, and a dressing table and a mirror inside the tent with a brush and a comb, and that was my loo. So, working in those developing countries is so different from working at the higher level, but I'd never say I'd do it again. I think it was absolutely fantastic.
Yes, very sort of character developing too, isn't it, Jennifer?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And one of the other sort of side advantages to doing what you've been doing for so long and in so many countries is being part of that sort of family, a wonderful sort of camaraderie in the horse world, and meeting so many people, Jennifer, that those must be the memories that you sit with each day.
They are memories, but luckily I'm still very friendly with a lot of those people that I've worked with. And in fact, we've just had, this weekend, Catherine Narinda, the manager of the Olympic department here, and Giuseppe Della Casa, the chair of eventing. And they've been here this weekend for a seminar. And, I mean, it's just like coming back, there's my family, and because Giuseppe helped at Sydney, he was one of my ITOs. And Catherine I've known for years, ever since I was on the committee, because I was on the FEI eventing committee for 4 years when Catherine was secretary, and she still is. And so, this is it. They always say, and where's Brucey, because they know Bruce. As you say, he's always there. And so it's the friends I've made around the world, and we're taking off to England shortly, because I am working at the Olympics, actually, and we're taking off, and I know the whole thing, the whole reason for going is because I'm going to see so many of my friends that I've made around the world.
Yes, that's absolutely marvellous. Well, I have to ask you, of course, when you've watched so many competitors, Jennifer, fly past you, galloping past you, or trotting down the centre line, or galloping through that victory gallop, there must have been so many memorable moments. Are there any that really rise to the top?
Yes, definitely. When we were at Seoul, because I was working at Seoul in 88, it was Toddy going through and winning. Mark Todd.
Yeah. And he became the double Olympic champion back-to-back.
He did. Yeah, he did. And it was just that it was so I suppose you could say it was unexpected, but to do it again, on Charisma, and that's the horse that we always think of, Charisma and Mark Todd. But that's because we're a bit parochial.
Well, so much to be proud of with the sport, and you've certainly influenced it for many, many years. Now, life has slowed down a little bit. As you said, you're still involved at national level, back to the grassroots of the sport in your backyard. But you also have time for some other pastimes, don't you? Some trout fishing?
Yes, we do. We do when we can. We haven't done very much of it, but we do, and we take off, and we've got a boat that sits in the shed too long, and we don't use it, but we take off, and a couple of weeks ago we went off, and we're only 20 minutes from a lake, and had caught some lovely fish and came home again, and we have a motorhome, and we used to always use it for events every weekend, which we do still, but we've got a little boat that we take with us, and we're heading off to for a week now, and we'll do a bit of fishing and a bit of tramping, and we keep very fit, both of us, and that's just something else we do. I just think, when you get older, every day's a bonus, and you've got to do something, and we do, and we keep ourselves very fit. And my big job for the last 4 years has been president and chair of Equestrian Sport, and that was a huge job. And it was, as a volunteer, of course, but I retired in September last year, and that was my last big effort for our national board. But I'm still involved at events, as you say. I go back to my grassroots now, and I jump judge, or they put me on a appeal committee or an ad hoc committee, and I'm still an advisor for technical for stewards in New Zealand.
They know where they can find a reliable official for the sport. Now, Jennifer, at the end of the day, when you close your door, what has meant the most to you in your career, and how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as an official that was very fair. I always worked for the rider and the horse, always. I used to get a little bit cross with some of the politics that went on in the sport, but I used to say to people, in the end, are you doing this for the best for the horse and the rider, because that's what we're here for. So I always think, at the end of the day, this is what we're doing it for, the horse and the rider, not for ourselves. We want to make it a good sport and a better sport.
And you've certainly made your contribution to that, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being my guest this week.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Stafford. And please join me again next time when we celebrate the life of another equestrian legend. In the meantime, you can support our sponsors by visiting them online at PessoaUSA.com.